Hello and welcome everyone. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. All right, welcome everyone to the mentorship program training session on mentoring and coaching. Thank you first and foremost for volunteering to be a mentor in the new mentorship program that we started this year. So a brief overview of what we're going to discuss today. So first, I'm Miles Hogan. I am the Secretary for the Environmental Law Section's Executive Committee and also part of the Mentorship Program Committee. I'm going to go over an overview of the program, and Peter Ton will also help me in case I missed anything. Then we're going to have two speakers discuss mentoring, Letitia Moore and Brett Morris. Letitia Moore is a partner at Holland & Knight LLP and is an advisor to the Environmental Law Section. Brett Morris is a supervising Deputy Attorney General in the Special Prosecution Section of the California Attorney General's Office. Next, we'll go into a section on coaching. Dee Dee Dickey is the owner of Dickey Coaching and Consulting, and Dee Dee and Brett are also advisors to the Environmental Law Section. Then we'll have a question and answer session facilitated by Peter Ton. You can put questions at any time into the chat function, and then Peter will prompt the panelists to answer those questions during that Q&A period. So first off, I'm just going to go over the program and in general and some parameters for the program. So again, this is a new program that the Environmental Law Section started this year. It pairs newer attorneys with more experienced attorneys to provide certain benefits. So the idea behind the program for mentees is that they can broaden their network, develop meaningful professional relationships, gain valuable knowledge and insight into the profession, and maybe even successfully transition from another field into practicing environmental law. And for mentors, this is a way that you can contribute to the professional development of new attorneys, maybe even identify some potential new hires, develop your communication and leadership skills, and experience the value of giving back to the profession, which we really appreciate. And there is a link to the program website. We'll share this recording after this session as well as this PowerPoint presentation. So the general criteria in the matching process. So the criteria for the program is pretty straightforward. It's any environmental law section member willing to commit to membership for 1 year of the program. The idea behind being a mentee is that you're in your first 5 years of practice, and a mentor, you have at least 5 years of practice experience. But those aren't hard and fast rules. Those are just the suggestions for the parameters. The match letters were sent out in January to early March. If you have not received your match email with the letter attached, please let me or Peter Ton know, and we'll make sure to get that to you. And then we generally try to match mentors and mentees based on various criteria, availability of our applicant pool, and the preferences that you communicated in the applications. So for some guidelines for the program, people may have different objectives for why they wanted to participate in this program. And our suggestion, we're sort of hands off with this program. Our main goal is just to connect the mentors and mentees and allow you to take it from there with some suggestions and guidance from our committee. So we encourage you to develop your own personal ways of sharing your experiences with one another. At a minimum, you should meet initially to discuss your goals and reasons for participating in the program. And if you haven't done so already, please reach out to your mentee within the next 2 weeks, introduce yourself, and set up an initial discussion. Then beyond that, we recommend that you connect at least 4 times during the year-long commitment. And then after that, you're welcome to continue connecting once the year is over, but there's no obligation to do so. If your mentee is non-responsive, please contact the mentorship program for assistance. We already had that happen a few times. We were able to follow up with the mentee, make sure they had the right contact information, and then they were able to connect with their mentor. So a few suggested ways to be a resource. You can assist with job searches, such as reviewing resumes or offers or conducting mock interviews. You can assist with practice development, building skills, discussing their performance, sharing knowledge resources. You can invite them to attend hearings or other proceedings so they get that experience. And then you could also provide valuable career planning advice, discussion of short-term or long-term goals, share networks, and attend relationship building events together. And Letitia and Brett will get into some of these areas a bit more. Here are some suggested activities. You could introduce your mentee to a judge or another experienced practitioner, invite them to observe a hearing or a trial, participate together in an environmental law section networking event, and you can read or discuss a new case or even an article from our journal, the Environmental Law News. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will hand it over to Letitia Moore to discuss mentorship guidance and recommendations.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Miles and Peter, for inviting me to participate. So my role here will be to talk about sort of an overview of the mentor role, the mentor relationship. And it is a relationship, it's an engagement, and it is not a one-size-fits-all type of experience. It really is an experience that is defined by the participants. But I do think there's some key characteristics of mentoring that's useful to review, especially if you've not mentored before, or if you've mentored before, and as many of us do, we start at not really knowing what we're doing, and it just evolves as it evolves, which is as it should be. But I think as lawyers, we always like to have some guiding principles on how to do things. So what Brett and I are going to provide are some guiding principles, and I'm going to talk about the sort of the overview of that role, and Brett will talk about some very specific tips. So in terms of characteristics of mentoring, I would say there are 3 things to keep in mind: listening, creating a safe space, and being a resource. And when I say listening, sometimes I say listening and responding, and I'll explain that further later on. But just to start with, when I say listening, I don't mean listening and having answers, but think of it as listening and responding so that you have the ability, someone has the ability to engage with you. But let's start with being a resource, because I think that can be the most intimidating part of saying you're taking on a mentee and you are now a resource for that mentee. So as a resource, your career choices, your professional choices, they alone make you a resource. So you've already done some things, thought about some things, had conversations about things that your mentee may not have yet thought about, engaged with anyone about. And so just by virtue of where you are in your career and the choices that you've made, you are a resource. So based on your experience, your network, the information you have, the opportunities you've had, the things you've thought about and discussed with colleagues, with friends, with your own mentors, that makes you a resource for someone else. So it's not that you need to sit on boards and do all sorts of things and have a long career, but simply that you've stepped forward and you're at a certain place in your career. So you've had to think about issues. You need to think about CLE, or you've needed to think about being a panelist, or you've needed to think about work-life balance of making choices in how you engage with colleagues, or choosing a job, or searching for a job, or working on documents and appearing and making appearances in court. There are all number of things, many of the things that Brett will think about that you've already done. And because you've done them, or you've thought about them, or decided never to do them, you have experience, and by virtue of that, you're a resource. And that doesn't mean that you will always have an answer, but you may know where to get the answer based on your network. And again, you're having thought about this or not having thought about this. You know how to seek the answer, where to look for the answer, maybe even whether there is an answer. But again, when you think of yourself as a resource, it's not because you have a long resume of activities, and you may well have a long resume of activities, but it's simply that you, in having gone through your career choices, can present yourself and provide a resource for someone who has not yet made those choices or thought about those particular issues, or is just beginning to think about them. So as a mentor, you are a resource simply based on your experience and your career choices. And then creating a safe space is another characteristic, I think, of important characteristic of mentorship. You can provide an opportunity for a mentee, a colleague, a future colleague, to ask those questions without there being any consequences for having asked the question or what the answer would be. You're not making any career decisions, job decisions. You're not making any decisions for this person, so you can create a space that allows them to ask those questions, talk about those things that they may not otherwise have anyone to talk to those things about. And again, you don't need to necessarily have an answer, but you provide an opportunity in the space to have the discussion. And so in creating that space, safe space, you just need to think of it as a space where you're creating a confidential, non-judgmental opportunity to have an honest and open discussion about anything, big, small, or indifferent. It's just a space. So in your experience makes you a resource. Your willingness to have the discussion and treat it as a safe space makes it a safe space and an opportunity for your mentee. And then in all of this, listening is important. Because again, this is an engagement. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It is characterized by the people who are participating. And so a large part of it is listening and engaging. And Miles talked about taking that first step, interacting with your mentee and having that initial conversation. A key part of having that first conversation is asking your mentee, what are they looking for in this mentorship relationship? And some will have a very specific answer. Others will not really have an answer. And so knowing that you need to have that conversation, and I put forward that asking that question in that initial conversation helps you get started. The answers and the things that mentees find valuable about mentorship can be hearing about your particular career path, like literally the career path, how you got from here to there, what steps you took to do it, or why you did it. It may be hearing about your particular environmental practice and how your day rolls out, how your week rolls out, because we're all very different, and the environmental bar is huge, and the types of practices within it are very huge and very different. And our work styles and opportunities and obligations are very different depending on whether you're a federal attorney, a private practice attorney, municipal attorney, nonprofit. If you have a job that's regulatory or litigation, it's all very different. So a mentee may simply be interested in hearing what you do in particular. The mentorship may be an opportunity for them to hear about networking. Like, how do you go about networking? What do you do in that space? What does that really mean when you network? When you go to a conference, how do you jazz yourself up to take those steps to start talking to people? What sort of conferences do you choose to go to? They may be asking questions or looking for from their mentor, how to figure out job opportunities. Where does one look for job opportunities? They may want a mentor who can talk to them about what are the different types of environmental law practices. When we say the environmental bar, what does that mean? So these are things that a mentee can value in a mentorship relationship. They're the sorts of things that one might talk about. And I put them out there just to say, in that initial conversation, ask what they're interested in. And it may be that they have a great deal to say about what they're interested in, or they may not know. And I give you these examples as things you could think about. It's like, okay, well, I can start the conversation by telling you about my career path, if that would be useful for you. Or we can start the conversation by, I can tell you specifically about my job and what I do and how it works. Or I can tell you about why I decided to be a mentor. Again, it's first ask that question, listen to what they say, and then respond. You don't have answers per se, but you can provide information that helps that dialogue get started. And that first conversation can be hard. So I would say, ask them what they're interested in and run through a list of things that you can talk about. And in this first conversation, what would they like you to talk about? And leave time for you to share information and then to listen to how they respond. And that will help you set up this relationship, this engagement going forward in that mentor-mentee piece. So I'll just close with the characteristics of mentoring: listening, creating a safe space, and being a resource. And you are a resource by virtue of simply where you are in your career today. And I'll turn it over to Brett.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I have to say I agree just about 100% with everything Letitia said. The theme, the concept, the ideas that she's putting, she stole pretty much anything that I could possibly add from her thunder. But I'll tell you a little bit about, I've been a mentor specifically for a couple of programs designed mentor-mentee relationships with the environmental law section here. My office has been doing this for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, and quite honestly, not just necessarily coincidence, but thankfully very good luck. We started one around May of 2020, and everybody being away from work and everybody having that disconnect, the value of this program has been huge and immense. And I was somewhat doing that in my office prior to COVID, but we found some huge benefits for us. So we have some guideline sample questions. You can find them pretty much anywhere on the internet and other samples, books, etc. Sample questions you would ask, more specifics. But my role today is to tell you a little bit about some specific tips and some specific ideas that I've come up with my experience in mentoring. And I like I say, I agree with Letitia about the first meeting, and don't feel pressure on that first meeting to define and decide your relationship for the entire year. But it certainly is forethought to think about these questions and ask those questions. And don't be afraid to ask them in your second meeting or your third meeting, to kind of gently remind the mentee, because as you find in between each of your discussions, the cogs are turning and the wheels are going, and they'll come back with some new application like, oh yeah, so maybe it'll sink in later. But I agree with asking, it's not necessarily turning the question back on them, but asking what the two of you are going to do. And that's really a question of, what do you hope that I can provide? What do you think is a specific point or an area that you would like to discuss with me? And I've got 3 of those that I'll talk about. But also, feel free to ask your mentee, what do you think are your biggest challenges, and what do you think are your strengths? Not necessarily interview type questions, but challenge them to think about what it is that they're hoping to engage you for, so that you're not just having another conversation with, granted, not somebody down the street, but also not just somebody from your office, that you're talking about work one day. It's not coffee or water cooler discussion. So I found, and my background is I've been with the government pretty much my entire career. So I can't tell you what it's like to work for a law firm, and I can't tell you what it's like to work for a nonprofit. And I use those three traditional areas. Of course, they're not that way anymore. There are a number of mixtures and ways that people do law these days, and especially in not working in an office anymore, there's all sorts of mixtures. So just for the ease of my thinking, if somebody you're mentoring is not a government worker, but they want to ask you about working at a nonprofit, I think, and I provide my experience of having worked with nonprofits or opposing, or same with the law firm, opposing a law firm, what style I like, what style I notice. I mean, so you're not limited to just, specifically your personal experiences. You can tell them to consider, and these are the phrases I use. Well, consider this particular style, or hypothetically, this might occur, or, when we get to the career discussions, do you want to go down path A or path B? I don't leave it as somewhat linear or choice A or choice B. There's a numerous ways that this can go, but really, to echo what Letitia was saying, you're asking the mentee to consider themselves. You're kind of asking them to influence a little bit about what it is that they want and the path that they're already starting to go down, and you're trying to ask them to consider based on your experience and feedback. My tips, the way when I go back and think about it, the mentees that I've worked with, the folks that I've worked with, I kind of break it down into what they really want to discuss. And it falls to me in about three areas: work-related, career-related, and they may not necessarily ask about this, but I'll talk about it, personal-related. So the work-related, whether they're new to a particular office or just new to the legal career, they may have very little or just uncertain expectations of how a draft should look, what the timeline is. If you get a research project, is it a day, is it a week? Of course, those are specific about knowing your who assigned it to you, how much effort should go into it. But they may ask you, do I cover everything? Do I use footnotes? Do I put? So frankly, it's just a discussion of how does this work thing work? So those are the kind of questions you'll get. So think about that. Feedback. Are they getting feedback, especially these last 3 years? Are they just receiving assignments, or can you provide to them some ideas of how to ask for feedback and when to ask for feedback, ways to do that doesn't appear to the person that assigned to them that you're being overly, grinding, trying to get some response. I think it's somewhat work related. Every firm is different. Every office is different. How you personally as a lawyer store your research or your issues, or quote unquote your brief bank. Do you have a hard file? Do you use a thumb drive? Do you use a separate folder? Where do you keep these issues that you think might come across again in your career, so you're not constantly researching anew? But do you have some sort of a filing system or some idea about that? Style, again, whether it's litigation, being in court, or writing, everybody who's new to the career or new to an office will want to know how that is achieved. How do you go about finding that? So those are the sort of questions you'll get. And again, like I said, I haven't worked in a law firm. I think each office has its way, or it's the quote unquote way we like to do things. So I can't speak to that, but I can tell you I've been in a number of courts, and I've had a number of local rules or court rules. They may ask you, what's the clerk in this particular court? What's the practice in this particular county? So those are the work-related questions you'll get. And if they don't ask you that, think of those very questions to ask them, so that's a way as a mentor to sort of help them out. How is the workflow going? How is the response and feedback that you're getting? Because that would be important to them. but they may not know that yet. So there are a few things to think about work related. Career related, you know, I'm not saying ask them for their resume and go over it. They may ask you for that. And again, that's an experience thing. I've looked at thousands of resumes. I know the ones that are 10 pages, I probably don't read as much as I do the ones that are 1 page or 2 pages. It depends on a style. So they may ask you for tips on a resume. But really it's how to, what information do you want, or what experiences do you want on that resume? So is it litigation? How do you go about getting court appearances? Do you volunteer, or do you solely do it through your work office? How can you get more of that sort of thing? Consider asking them if they themselves have considered a niche or an expertise that they're thinking of, or if there is a general practice area that they want to look at. You know, some people on a resume want to keep it more general. Some want to create some sort of a highlight that sticks out as a general area that they're working on. So if so, ask them what that is, and then how you can provide some tips on how to go and engage or get into opportunities that would show up for their work on that someday on a resume. If they are thinking of litigation, or if they're thinking of you know, more transactional, they may want you, or you could offer introducing them to either somebody from a courtroom or a judge even, or a mediation or a colleague that you've worked with. The more people that they meet, the more comfortable they'll start getting with meeting what might not appear to them to be regular people, but in a lot of respects, a judge and a mediator and a colleague is a regular person. So the more that they meet those, I think the better that they'll feel, and that's a very good mentoring thing to do, is to offer some introductions. It's I guess an easy way to say you're networking. You're not really networking, but you're providing them some mentoring of how to meet these others in your field. I always recommend to people, of course, new in the field or who are looking for a job, is to consider attending a local bar, or of course the environmental law section, any of those bar functions. If they come with you, definitely introduce them around as much as you can. Get them to enjoy that experience, but also to feel like it's not just a drop in and go, but to try and network. So you could be the conduit for that. There's a ton more in career personal. I just want to touch on that at the end, because I think that's equally as important as the other two. Your mentee may not be thinking of it at all. They're thinking, how do I get my job done, and how do I progress in my career? Neither one of those is going to happen if they're not healthy in providing themselves some personal time. Those are some questions that you should consider. Ask them to consider. How is your time? How is your work-life balance? How do you address that? How does your office address that? I'll tell you what happens at my office. Give them some tips how to approach either seeking or asking for that balance. But definitely you need to raise, I don't say you need to, you must, but it's very good to raise that as a question. How is their personal life going? That's a very important part, I think. So last, to wrap all this up, I think communication. I don't think you necessarily need to say it'll be the second Tuesday of every month that we talk, or we will have a meeting, or a in person, or a text, or I find, since I was practicing in what's called the last century, 1990s, some of the newer people aren't as good or comfortable with having phone calls. They're very good with texting, so that's different for me. So consider you might have different ways of communicating with a mentee. But for me, I think every 2 weeks, I at least drop a text, or at least say, how are you doing? And of course, if they talk to me and they say, oh, I've got X coming up as an event, I try and put that on my calendar. So a few days after, I'll say, how did X go? Just so that they keep getting a little reminder that you even exist. Because if you just do it once a month or once every quarter, it'll drop off really fast, and they get so busy, and they're, again, worried about work and career. They might not be thinking personal, and they'll find it very personal and very touching that you reached out. So communicate and reach out, and then just feel free to ask them questions as much as they're asking you. And I hope that covers a lot of specific tips. If not, just reach out to me and I'll give you some more.
Well, thank you so much, Letitia and Brett, for all that wonderful mentoring advice. I just want to remind everyone participating, you can ask questions in the Q&A feature. So next we have Dee Dee, who's going to go over some coaching strategies.
Hello, everybody. Let me just get this queued up. Great. So thank you all for volunteering to mentor new environmental lawyers. You're doing something that's incredibly valuable for the profession and for the people that you'll be helping. As you've heard from my colleagues, your mentees will no doubt want to talk about a variety of subjects. Some of those subjects might include how to plan their careers, be effective in their current jobs, and balance work and the rest of their lives. Would you like those conversations to inspire your mentees, help them get a sense of what they want and how to get there? So if so, I'm going to share some ideas from professional coaching that could help you be an even more effective mentor on these sorts of subjects. So before I describe what coaching is and what it could mean for your mentoring, I'm going to tell you something about myself. I am a former environmental lawyer and I now work as a coach. I loved environmental law, but I decided I wanted to help people in a new way. I'm focusing on supporting people so that they can thrive at work and in the rest of life. I truly enjoy helping people find clarity, confidence, and energy about reaching their goals. Last summer, I coached the environmental law section's amazing diversity and inclusion fellows. They had some great mentors, but I offer them a different kind of conversation through our coaching sessions. The fellows told me that our conversations helped them a lot by challenging them to reflect on what they really wanted and how to get there. So my goal on this panel is to tell you about how you can use what I'm calling a coaching approach to increase the tools you have as a mentor. It's completely optional to use what I'm going to describe, but it may be very helpful for some mentoring conversations. So you may be wondering what the difference is between mentoring and coaching. It's a great question. A mentor shares wisdom and guidance based on their own experience. A coach asks thoughtful questions in confidential sessions to help clients gain clarity about what they want to achieve, obstacles that may get in the way, and strategies to meet their goals. So if the idea of coaching is new to you, you're definitely not alone. Lawyers and law firms have been somewhat behind the business world in using coaches. Companies have used coaches for a number of years to help their executives reach their full potential. More recently, the business world has been using coaches to work with teams and to train managers on how to offer coaching to their employees. So I want to talk about what I mean by a coaching approach to mentoring. And this is my term. I'm using the term to refer to a process of using open-ended questions with your mentees. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of how to do that in a couple of minutes. As I mentioned before, it's completely optional. You can use it as much as you can use it in your mentoring conversations as much as you want to. Is using this approach the same thing as coaching? No. The International Coaching Federation has detailed and rigorous standards for the coaches that it certifies. So my course that I took to be trained as a coach included far more than I'm going to suggest that you do today. So why use a coaching approach to mentoring? Well, there are a couple of important ways that using a coaching approach may help you, as well as your mentee. First, if you use a coaching approach for the questions that don't have clear answers, you may be able to come to a deeper understanding of what your mentee really needs and wants. That means that when you offer advice, you're more likely to tailor it so that it's just right for them and their situation. The second reason is that if you encourage your mentee to brainstorm some of their own answers to those open-ended questions, they may see their time with you as even more valuable. And who doesn't want their time to be seen as valuable? That's because their brain will process the information most actively so they learn more. For the same reason, they will be more likely to implement the takeaways. So if you have a mentee who wants to talk about career planning, it may be particularly helpful to add the coaching approach I'm about to describe. So most of the fellows that I worked with last summer focused their conversations on career planning. I've listed some of the issues here. I asked them open-ended questions and had them reflect on what was most important to them. I also engaged them with brainstorming. So they said that questions like these and the ones I'm going to go through on the rest of my presentation help them find out what they really wanted and how to move forward. One of my mentees, in fact, said, "I've never thought before about what I want to do. Nobody's ever asked me." Wow. So another type of issue, and certainly the other panelists have mentioned this as well, the other issue that is can be really helpful with a coaching approach is how to work more effectively. Also, personal issues, work-life balance. So questions about getting direction and feedback at work, speaking up, managing time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These can be things where this kind of open-ended brainstorming kind of approach can be very helpful. So what are the key actions for mentors when we think of a coaching approach? So I've set out 5 things here that I think are important. And if you're going to remember one slide from this presentation, I think this is really key. So the first one is to ask one open-ended question at a time. And then wait for the answer, even if the other person is silent for a while. The silence usually means that they're turning it over in their brain. Their brain's working on it. When they do answer, listen deeply and with curiosity. Letitia talked about holding a safe space. This is what we're talking about here. And then acknowledge their answers. And this is the part that's difficult for mentors. Excuse me. Try not to offer advice until the mentee has run out of advice. When your mentee is brainstorming with ideas about how they can solve their problem or what they can do, they're going to be more likely to remember it if they sort of generated the idea. And often what they come up with is exactly what you would have suggested. But when they get to the point where they say, I don't know, that's the time to jump in and give them the great advice you're going to have. So this slide shows a suggested roadmap for how you can apply to a coaching approach to a meeting with a mentee. You don't need to do all the steps. Figure out what works for you. So the first is to define the meeting focus as clearly as possible. The second thing is to discuss the mentee's ultimate goal on that issue. Then explore the issue, encourage your mentee to do some brainstorming, and then offer advice as needed. And as an optional next step, you can add a meeting wrap-up. So I'm going to jump in with a slide on each of these points. So defining the meeting focus is something you're probably going to do already, right? Both of our speakers have suggested you're going to ask them what they want to talk about. But sometimes your mentee may present a vague or complicated topic. They may launch into some discussion of some complicated thing at work, toxic personalities, change in leadership, whatever it is. And it can be difficult to know what they want to talk about. So then it can be useful to ask them, if they had to pick one thing to focus on today, what would it be? So, or what would you like to accomplish in the next X minutes that would be most helpful to you? The second thing I'm going to suggest is to ask them about their ultimate goal on the question. So the direct approach is to just ask them, what would you like to happen? The other approach is to ask them to visualize the approach. And this is particularly helpful with things like career planning, but it's useful for other open-ended sorts of things as well. So, you can ask them, if you woke up tomorrow or reached the end of the year or started that new job you want, and you were very happy with the results, what would it be like? What would you be most proud you've done? What steps would you have taken to get there? So asking questions to explore a mentee's issue is, again, you asking questions for them and just really listening deeply. Sometimes a mentee may use general or ambiguous terms to describe what they want. So you can ask, whatever the term is, what does X mean for you? What makes the issue important to you? What's getting in your way? Is there anything else? What have you tried so far? But issues like this will help you understand what they want, what they're up against, but also will help them in their understanding. So moving on to brainstorming. So now, now that your mentee knows what they want and they've identified what's gotten in their way, it's time to help them figure out how they can achieve their goal. This slide shows some examples of questions that you and your mentee can brainstorm about how they want to move forward. And I've personally found that questions like these can help someone think about how to move forward, even when they thought they didn't have any ideas. What could you do to get there? Well, I don't know. Well, what's worked for you in the past? Once they've got some ideas, maybe you've moved on to give them some ideas. What could get in your way of doing that? Well, what could help with that? What else? So once your mentee runs out of ideas, then if you're doing a coaching approach, that's the time to jump in and offer that great advice you have. So as an optional step, you can add a meeting wrap-up. You may already be doing this. So this is kind of a, typical next steps, key takeaways. And why do this? It's because recalling and reflecting at the end of a meeting can increase the mentee's retention of your discussion. This step could help energize your mentee to help them move forward with a sense of purpose. It's as simple as asking them to talk about what they might do next or what was most helpful. And of course, when you ask what was most helpful, that answer can help you be an even more effective mentee in your next session with them. So since we can't do a next steps or a key takeaways, since we're recording this, I'm going to instead offer as a wrap up here an opportunity for you to try this at home. So I suggest that you find a time when you're feeling relaxed and you just want to take a couple moments to reflect. So imagine that you've reached the end of this year and you are feeling very happy with your job, your career, your life, maybe all of the above. What would that look like? What would you be most proud that you've done over the course of that year? And what actions would you have taken to get there? So in conclusion, I thank you again for being here today and for coaching our amazing mentees. If you have questions or want examples of questions to ask mentees, please contact me. My contact information is there. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee, Letitia, and Brett for that wonderful advice. Now we'll move on to the Q&A session. Again, as Miles indicated, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A in the chat and I will read them. The first question that we have here, and I'll just read it here. This has not happened, but what if your mentee tells you they are experiencing something serious, like sexual harassment? Maybe we can direct that to Dee Dee, who touched on difficult issues.
Or mentoring. I think if they're experiencing sexual harassment, it may make sense to hear what their concern is and then figure out how to get them the appropriate professional resources to deal with that.
Letitia and Brett, do you have anything you wanted to add to that query?
So yeah, I think again, you're creating that space for someone to talk about something, and then you're thinking about your experience and resources you might know. That's a very, serious concern, and you want to be able to point them in the direction where they can get assistance. Like within, I've been in government for 30 years, and now I'm in private practice. In both of those organizations, within my organizations, I know where the resources are and where what the process is for dealing with it. And if it's someone within my organization, I would help them maneuver those processes. If it's someone outside of my organization, what I can share is that at EPA, when I was there, this is how it was dealt with. At Holland and Knight, this is what's set up to deal with it. So it's a question of whether there's someplace in their organization they should go look, or if this is really something that we're at the stage where we're needing law enforcement involved. You think about what you know and then offer up the information you have to help them.
Oh, it looks like we're getting an interruption on Letitia's stream. Maybe we could move to Brett if you would like to add anything.
I just agree with Letitia. Like I said, I've worked at the government. At my office, that's a mandatory reporting. So I would be talking to that person about the office that they would go to, the resource. But the question of if it's somebody from the outside, what is that resource at their office? Of course, I'm sure the overlay may be, how will that impact my career? How will that impact my work? All you can do is be a sounding board on that. But yes, my encouragement would be to find the appropriate resource, and I'd give them my experiences of where we have that and consider what those are.
And along the same vein, in dealing with difficult issues, do you have any advice on setting boundaries and what those boundaries may look like? This can go to either Dee Dee or Brett.
Requirements that if someone has mental health issues, medical issues, that sort of thing, that I'm required to point them in the direction of appropriate mental health or health practitioners. Are those the kind of boundaries you mean?
It was an open question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have not experienced that in any of my past relationships, but that is a good hard question if it were to come up. I think, again, it's just a matter of, I wouldn't say flipping the question, but reminding the mentee about what your role is and what they need to consider. I in a sense, saying you need to consider the question, you need to consider the resource and where you should go for those. I am just a sounding board. I am just your mentor. I'm not going to be able to provide whatever that issue may be, A, B, or C. But here are the things that I know of based on my experiences. So please consider which one to try.
Another question is, someone mentioned that initiating the mentor-mentee relationship could be kind of awkward sometimes. What type of icebreakers or other methods have been successful for you in kind of jumpstarting that relationship?
Well, I think it's like any other first meet. Of course, if you find out about your person and learn of their resume or their background or something that you can talk about, oh, I went to law school in that same state or that same area, or I see that you have an interest in water as opposed to air. Something to get them on some sort of firm sort of collateral area that the two of you share, so that you can start on a ground of talking about the same thing, because eventually they do want to get you to unfamiliar territory and uncomfortable territory. So I don't have any specific icebreakers. I think it's like any other conversation you might have with somebody you met, or a new neighbor, or a new colleague. You just need to start asking a few background questions that hopefully you know a little bit. You already know the answer, but you're trying to get the person comfortable to share with you and understand that it's a safe space and you can share as much as possible.
Dee, do you want to add anything to that? Or
I guess it's not exactly an icebreaker, but for a first meeting, it might also be helpful to explain something about how you see your role, how often you want to meet, kind of questions you want to deal with, kind of the outlines of what you're offering as a mentor.
Thank you. This is kind of more of a specific question. We have some more experienced attorneys who are entering in as mentees, but environmental law is a new field for them. Do you have any specific advice to approaching that relationship or helping a mentee in that way? And I'm gonna start with Letitia on that one, since she's come back to us.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Some of our mentees, environmental law is a second career for them, so they may be experienced attorneys already, but wanting to break into environmental law as a new field. Do you have any specific advice for handling that type of relationship?
I think it is, breaking into a new field is just the same conversation about your experience. So we're matching environmental law practitioners with their mentees. And so again, you want to share what the field you're in and what you know about this type of a practice. And what I often find in talking to attorneys who are coming out of some other practice, it's understanding what it means to be an environmental lawyer. And I always say, I was a federal government regulatory agency environmental lawyer. And that practice is very different than if I'd been at a different federal agency or at a state agency. And it's certainly very different from what I'm doing now in private practice. So I think in that mentorship role, what you provide is information on what the practice is like. And I go back to, you are a resource. You are there, you're working with other folks, you've observed things, so you can talk about what you've done and what you've seen, and then how you make that entree into that practice is about finding jobs, finding job opportunities, and networking, and also how to talk the talk about being an environmental lawyer. We talk in acronyms way too often. And so it's also having a conversation about the knowledge base you need to build up, and how to hold that conversation in an interview to demonstrate, if not your existing knowledge, but your ability and to move into that space, and the skills that you can already bring to that space because of your existing practice. And I apologize for disappearing. Power went out in the most dramatic way here.
Well, thank you for rejoining us. Dee or Brett, do you want to respond to that one at all? Or?
I guess what occurs to me is that for experienced attorneys, that it might be particularly valuable for them to get suggestions of the kind of bar activities that the other panelists were mentioning earlier, so that they can get a sense of how other environmental attorneys talk, what we talk about, what do we think about.
Yeah, I'd like to know what disputes or what matters that they're just starting out with. Is there something beyond that that they're envisioning that they're going to start getting into? I mean, is it air, soil, and water, or is it litigation, or what? But for me, my experience has been to remind them that this is a very small bar, very collegial, very non-adversarial in a lot of ways, and that communication, reaching out and talking to others is very appropriate in the environment section, which might be different than what they are used to from their previous practice. But yeah, I just would want to know what they're working on and tell them to feel free to discuss with others.
I have an additional thought on that, if I may, Peter. And that would be to explore with them what has drawn them into environmental law, what they're hoping will be different about environmental law than whatever they've been doing before, as well as what they're hoping to leave behind them. And those conversations might be very helpful for them in getting a clear sense of what their new practice area will be like.
We've only got about a minute left. So in about 30 seconds, can each of you tell a personal mentor-mentee success story?
I'll go before I lose power again. I got a phone call from someone who'd been referred to me. We had a long conversation about the practice of environmental law, my career, and I gave them some advice. They followed up, and this was a law student. They followed up, and they're now one of our diversity fellows.
I had
Brett, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I had a law student that I was mentoring 10, 12 years ago. Person wasn't sure if she should even go to law school, much less or finish law school or go into environmental law. Now she is a supervisor at a state agency. So she's really progressed, has resolved a lot of great cases. So talking people through, really, it's like we've talked, it's not any advice I gave, it's them just considering what they should do next. And they did it.
I'll go. I met all the diversity and inclusion fellows from the program last summer at the Yosemite conference this year. They all told me that our sessions were incredibly helpful. And one of the students even contacted me a couple months later to engage me to coach her on some issues that were coming up for her during her school year. And it was very gratifying.
Thank you so much for those stories, for one thing, and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge here today, Letitia, Dee, and Brett. We really appreciate it. And we also actually want to thank every mentor who's participating in this program. A small investment of your time can make a lifelong impact, just as Letitia, Dee, and Brett shared their stories. So ELS really appreciates your participation in our program. At the very last slide that Miles has put up here, there's some contact information. Should you have any question or any support, each one of us here on the panel has listed our emails. So please feel free to contact any one of us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.